can I move them forward? Or, there we go. Yeah, a certain amount of knowledge is assumed, but I think sometimes when you grow up around an asset and you're familiar with it, it's sometimes easy to forget about the significance in it, perhaps in the UK or European context. Manchester, as Mike pointed out, had grown to become the third largest in the UK, the largest outside London. But I think a couple of really significant points are the vision shown many years ago to actually lay the foundations for growth and for the role that it can play in the north of England by building that second runway. And while we say the third in the UK, actually the really significant point is that it's effectively the UK's second hub, true international gateway, serving a northern catchment area that is distinct from and does not really overlap with that of London Heathrow. And that is what's very much led to the growth in services in recent years, that those looking at the UK see sufficient demand in the north of England and the catchment area surrounding Manchester to be able to add new routes, particularly long-haul routes to the likes of China, Hong Kong, India, etc., Addis Ababa, Middle East, Singapore, to add those routes, knowing that there's enough demand from a business point of view and from a leisure point of view in that northern catchment area that isn't going to cannibalise any traffic from elsewhere. And of course, as well, that the infrastructure exists, so there is spare runway capacity and also the terminal capacity as well. Mike's absolutely right. We have grown. Every year was a record year in the last few years to about 29 million. We're fully expecting to break the 30 million barrier this year. Excuse me. And the significance of that is that was timed to coincide with the opening of the main phase of our £1 billion investment in the extension of Terminal 2, which was going to give us world-class terminal capacity to meet that runway capacity and really lay the foundation for the next chapter, not just in the airport's growth, but hopefully in the northern economy's growth and the rebalancing of the UK through some of those routes. We estimate that the economic impact of the direct employment and the support aviation provides to other sectors equates to about £5.3 billion a year of gross value added to the region. And it's absolutely right. There are 25,000 people employed on this campus alone. We say around a further 48,000 jobs supported in related industries, so hospitality and tourism. But I think that only tells part of the story, because actually there are so many sectors that may not appear to be directly related because they're not involved in travel or tourism, but actually rely on connectivity for their growth trajectory. Those that export, those that import, those that export services as well and want quick and fast access to global centres of excellence in their field, whether that's technology on the west coast of America, whether it's the energy sector in Houston, whether it's life sciences traveling to Boston or parts of Southern America or other parts of the world, whether it's advanced manufacturing, China, whatever it may be. Actually, the propensity to fly on international business is much greater in and around Manchester Airport than it is other parts of the north, because of that connectivity. And I think it's easy to lose sight of that. We were certainly positioning that connectivity as key to that levelling up agenda that the government talks about, particularly when partnered with investing in high-speed east-west and south north-south rail at an interchange at Manchester Airport that meant that all parts of the north could quickly and easily access the connectivity that we were providing. It should point out also that cargo is an important aspect of Manchester. While we don't do a huge amount of pure cargo, actually the growth in long-haul traffic has also meant a huge amount of belly-hold cargo has increased. And certainly with the addition of routes like those to China, we saw the export values dramatically increased as a result of that connectivity. So that gives you a bit of an overview of where the airport was at, and I'm sure we can come back to some questions, but what I intend to do now is really dive straight into the impact of the pandemic on on demand and where we are, and just to try and help people understand perhaps the challenges we're facing and what we need to see in the weeks ahead. So, in peak summer, we would be dealing with up to 100, 115,000 passengers a day. In some occasions, or in the last few weeks, it's been around 17,000. So currently, on average, there's about 80,000 fewer people per day travelling through Manchester Airport. And at the real start of this pandemic, we were handling around 500 passengers a day versus the 100,000 we would be. So the impact's been huge. You can see that if you just look at January to August, bearing in mind that January and February were more or less okay, we've handled 5.6 million passengers versus the 20.1 we would have been otherwise. And just to reiterate that, as well as the sort of direct cash benefit that is lost to us, that is obviously going to have played a part in that wider economic impact. And we've already seen various jobs announcements from aviation companies around that impact, resulting in employment impact as well. So that gives you a picture of the volume reduction. And a lot of that is driven by the markets we serve. We're lucky that we do serve, have flights in normal circumstances around 220 different destinations. Pre the travel corridor and the quarantine policy coming in, 75% of those were open in some shape or form, notwithstanding the fact that, some airlines would have chosen to cancel services or pause them, but the markets were at least open. And over time, the various introduction of quarantine and travel restrictions has meant that has reduced to around 39%. What we've seen is the weekly addition of countries to that list. But unfortunately, from our point of view, some of the quirks of the policies have meant that some markets have been unnecessarily closed off, and that has impacted the summer. It's meant that people have not been able to travel to places that in many ways they should have been able to. And of course, it's accelerated the impact on aviation and on the airport specifically because of those policies. So we can perhaps go into a bit more detail on that in a second. In many ways, the thing that has perhaps been most frustrating for UK airport groups and ourselves has been that the measures to protect public health and to add a travel dimension to that, of course, have to take priority. But where we've had scenarios where we feel markets have either been unnecessarily closed off, or actually some markets could have been reopened, or we could have found a way to salvage some of the summer or enable more travel in a safe way. The UK has been very slow to act and been very slow to listen to the concerns of industry when we've seen, meanwhile, other countries take quick and innovative action. And that action has been taken in recognition of the role of aviation to economies and to recovery. So for example, I'll probably take the middle point first, which is regionalisation. Spain's almost a perfect example of this. A reasonably large country that saw spikes in a couple of northern regions, and that was, of course, absolutely right to respond to that and restrict travel in and out of those regions to protect public health. The biggest anomaly or thing that appeared illogical was the blanket application of one Spanish region has now got a spike, therefore we will advise against travel to the whole of Spain, including the Balearics and Canaries, and impose a quarantine on that. Combined, the Balearics and Canaries accounted for the 5th biggest travel market for the whole of the UK, and parts of Gran Canaria were further away from the spike in northern Spain than Dundee was to the spike in northern Spain. Yet that market was blocked off. because of that blanket approach. We've eventually seen, as a result of pressure, that the islands that fall safe can be treated differently. But by the time that happened, the whole of the summer season was effectively gone. And meanwhile, other countries had enabled their people to enjoy holidays there, and to enjoy and enable the aviation industries in those countries to enjoy some benefit. There's a gag in somewhere about being in resorts and German tourists getting the towels on the sunbeds first. And normally you have to watch it through your hotel window, not through a TV screen or on the internet, because you just simply can't travel there. But that's not a gag I would make at all, of course. I think testing is the next thing to talk about. There is a sense that the 14-day quarantine requirement could be reduced if there was a sensible testing regime brought in. I understand that the Public Health England guidance itself suggests that a test after 5 days would capture the same number of people or have the same public health benefit as a full 14-day quarantine. But clearly the requirement to quarantine for 14 days, and the uncertainty for people that will their country they're traveling to get added or removed from the list while they're actually away, is a massive deterrent factor. Whereas some people, if they know that whatever happens, they can release themselves after 5 days, unless of course they were ill. That's something that people can build into their planning when they decide whether they are or not going to travel. We're approaching 3 weeks since Secretary of State stood up and said we were working towards a testing solution, and we still have heard nothing. Of course, summer's over. Looks like autumn half term will be wiped out. And real concerns now are what this means for the summer season and going into next year. And then I think the other point really has been about transparency. Newspapers are reporting a government threshold of 20 cases per 100,000 for travel restrictions. But the actual precise methodology around all the factors that need to, be considered is being unclear, and something we've not been able to get a handle on. And again, other countries have been really transparent on that stuff, to give people the understanding and a bit of a heads up on where they may or may not be able to travel to, and similarly airlines, the surety about being able to plan ahead. So, we have been looking at disappointed by the engagement, and I think our CEO was out there, the sort of sluggish approach to protecting the industry and enabling people to travel for leisure or business. And, clearly there are bigger issues at play at the minute, but it is something we'll continue to work on. And these really are the things that we're calling for at the minute. We've talked about some sort of testing regime, whether that's 1 test, 2 test, airport or off airport. Catching up with other countries on that. We believe that while the island policy is positive, so you can, if Gran Canaria to fall beneath the threshold, it could be opened up. Similarly, if Sicily were to have a spike, you could actually open up the whole of Italy, if that was deemed to be under the right threshold. We still believe that it must be possible to follow other countries and have a regionalised approach within big nations, where there is a region by region approach to measures, in the same way that we're or have been applying that within the UK. Surely somewhere hundreds and hundreds of miles away in northern Spain, for example, it could be restricted, while enabling travel to safer regions in the south, for example. Would like to see progress on that. I don't know how many people will be aware of air passenger duty and the passenger tax. A tax that's passed on to passengers through ticket prices, and is among, I think, only Chad in the world has a higher passenger tax than the UK. We understand that in normal circumstances, it's something that the government finds difficult to reform and look at, even though it does deter airlines from starting new services. However, we need to be absolutely clear that when we look to build back all the routes that have been lost, in the context of airlines having reduced their fleets and not going to be building back the same number of services. We are in direct competition with other countries. Airlines flying from China will be saying, what is going to be the most profitable route if we have to pick one? Is it Vienna to Beijing, or is it Manchester to Beijing, or is it Barcelona, Copenhagen to Beijing? And if we have a passenger tax that makes that route significantly less profitable on top of the already reduced demand, then the UK and Manchester will just lose out on some of those services. So we believe there should be a way of providing a holiday on that levy to incentivize airlines to build back those routes and ensure that the UK has got that leading global position that it aspires to have. And then other measures around travel guarantees to give people consumer confidence and protection. We're very hopeful today that the government will have listened to the concerns we have around the likely demand profile of aviation, and that while the furlough scheme has been accessed in as much as possible, and it's been a benefit, because our demand won't return, could we be one of the sectors that was looked at for an extended furlough scheme? Otherwise, the industry will see quite significant further redundancies. The other dimension to this is, while furlough has enabled us to deal with the cost of employment and individuals, we're huge infrastructure businesses that have stayed open. So our fixed costs are significant, and we have stayed open throughout. Yet we're incurring huge costs in business rates every year. And we've seen within the UK, the likes of Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, give aviation companies relief in business rates, but the same hasn't applied in England. Meanwhile, we've seen some sectors on the high street, such as supermarkets, that have actually had a sales increase during the current period, enjoy relief from business rates. And we just think that was a straightforward lever that could be pulled there. And then other measures around, other fixed costs around regulatory costs, and also trying to stimulate the market around duty-free and tax-free shopping as well. So they're the kind of things that we're talking to government about at the minute. We've seen some movement on some things, and we appreciate the support of Mike and his colleagues and others on that, and we're having as much direct engagement as we can. But I hope that paints a bit of a picture of the role that the airport plays normally, and also the predicament we're in now, and the kind of issues we're looking at currently.